She loved him from afar, convinced they were destined to be together. But when his fiancée stood in the way, her quiet obsession spiraled into a chilling crime that would leave a community shattered, and the truth, buried in the shadows, would only come to light when detectives uncovered the terrifying lengths she went to for a man who never even knew her. Emily Carter had always lived in the background of life. She worked quietly at a small bookstore tucked away on a peaceful street. Her days were predictable. She would open the shop in the morning, stack books on the shelves, and spend her lunch breaks reading in the park nearby. Emily's world was small and safe. She didn't have many friends, and her family lived in another town. She didn't mind the solitude. She had convinced herself that she didn't need anyone to feel complete. But deep inside, Emily longed for something more, something that would make her life feel meaningful. One ordinary afternoon, as she was walking home from work, Emily noticed a man standing across the street. He was helping an elderly woman carry her groceries. There was something about him that caught her attention immediately. He looked kind, confident, and effortlessly handsome. Emily paused, watching him from a distance as he smiled and walked away. She didn't know his name then, but that moment would change everything. Later that evening, Emily couldn't get him out of her head. She felt an odd excitement that she hadn't experienced before. The next day, she found herself walking the same route, hoping to see him again. Days turned into weeks, and her curiosity grew into obsession. She began to carefully observe his routine. She learned that his name was Daniel Lewis. He worked at an architecture firm, jogged in the mornings, and often visited the same coffee shop on Elm Street. Emily started going there too, sitting at the corner table, quietly watching him sip his coffee and chat with friends. Emily discovered that Daniel had a fiancée named Claire. She saw them together, laughing and holding hands. Something inside Emily shifted. She told herself that Claire didn't deserve him, that Claire didn't truly understand him the way she could. Emily began to imagine herself in Claire's place, walking beside Daniel, sharing coffee, living a perfect life together. The thoughts slowly consumed her, growing stronger with each passing day. Her quiet admiration transformed into dangerous fixation. Emily's behavior changed. She stopped meeting the few friends she had and avoided phone calls from her family. Every spare moment was dedicated to following Daniel's life. She scrolled endlessly through his social media profiles, saving his photos, and tracking his online activities. She found out where he lived and started walking past his house in the evenings, always keeping a safe distance, but never missing a chance to glimpse his silhouette through the window. Emily didn't think she was doing anything wrong. She convinced herself that she and Daniel were meant to be, and fate had simply brought them together in this unusual way. She believed that all she needed was time, and eventually, Daniel would notice her. But Claire was always there, in every photo, in every moment Emily desperately wanted to be a part of. Slowly, resentment began to build. Emily started to believe that Claire was standing in the way of her happiness, that Claire's presence was the reason Daniel couldn't see her. The fantasy grew more vivid. Emily began to write in a small journal, filling its pages with imagined conversations and future plans with Daniel. She pictured how he would look at her, how he would hold her hand, how they would build a life together once Claire was out of the picture. In her mind, it was only a matter of time. What started as an innocent curiosity had now taken root as a dangerous obsession. And without realizing it, Emily was already walking down a dark path from which there would be no return. Emily's Obsession with Daniel grew more intense as the days passed. She no longer felt satisfied just watching from a distance. It wasn't enough to see him walking down the street or sitting in a cafe. She wanted more. She needed to be part of his life, to somehow make him aware of her existence. Her mind became a constant loop of thoughts about him. She spent hours constructing imaginary scenarios where Daniel would see her, talk to her, and realize she was the one meant for him. The lines between her fantasies and reality began to blur, pulling her deeper into a dangerous mindset. Her quiet evenings transformed into secret missions. Emily started following Claire's every move. She learned where Claire worked when she finished her shifts and which routes she often took to get home. She discovered Claire's habits, her favorite stores, her routines. Emily felt like she was building a complete picture of the life that should have been hers. She grew increasingly convinced that Claire didn't deserve Daniel, that Claire wasn't truly right for him. Emily believed that she, and only she, could make Daniel happy. She created several fake online profiles and used them to carefully insert herself into Claire's world without revealing her true identity. Through these profiles, Emily sent anonymous messages filled with subtle threats and cruel remarks. She left harsh comments on Claire's social media posts, always hiding behind a new name and a blank face. Emily felt powerful behind the screen, slowly chipping away at Claire's confidence. She found comfort in the idea that she was affecting Claire's life, even if Claire had no idea who was behind it all. As her obsession deepened, Emily's thoughts turned darker. She no longer wanted to just unsettle Claire. She wanted her gone. Emily convinced herself that Daniel's sadness after losing Claire would eventually lead him to her, the person who could comfort him, understand him, and love him in a way no one else could. In Emily's mind, this was not an evil plan but simply the unfolding of destiny. She believed she was fixing something that had gone wrong, making the path clear for what was meant to happen. Emily began planning in secret. She purchased a dark jacket, gloves, and a plain cap that would help her blend into the crowd. She carefully mapped out Claire's schedule, noting the quiet streets and poorly lit areas that Claire passed on her way home. Emily practiced the route several times, making sure she could move quickly and leave without being noticed. She thought about every detail, convinced that this would be a perfect solution. Even as she planned, Emily's feelings toward Daniel remained pure in her mind. She still viewed herself as someone who loved him deeply. She didn't see herself as dangerous or cruel. To Emily, the horrible thing she was preparing to do wasn't really horrible at all. It was necessary. It was the only way to reach the life she had imagined so clearly in her head. Her days became mechanical, spent watching, waiting, and preparing. She no longer cared about work or the few people who still tried to reach out to her. Emily's world shrank until it contained only Daniel and the goal she had set for herself. She kept telling herself that this was the right thing, that she was simply removing the obstacle that blocked her happiness. Emily believed that soon Daniel would be free, and when he was, he would finally see her. But what Emily couldn't see was how far she had already fallen, how her twisted love had turned into something dangerous, and how the path she had chosen would soon lead to irreversible tragedy. The night Emily had been planning for finally arrived. It was cold and wet, the streets slick from hours of rain. Emily saw this as a sign that everything would go smoothly. She believed the weather would keep people indoors, the roads quiet, the witnesses absent. She dressed carefully, wearing the dark jacket, gloves, and cap she had bought weeks earlier. Every step she took felt rehearsed, like a performance she had practiced over and over in her mind. Claire's routine had not changed. She finished her evening classes around the same time every night, and always walked the same route home. Emily had memorized every turn, every shortcut, every shadowed corner. She knew exactly where Claire would pass and where Emily could wait. Unseen, her heart pounded in her chest, but she remained focused. In her mind, this was the final step toward the life she believed was meant for her. As Claire approached her street, Emily followed at a distance, careful to keep herself hidden. The rain continued to fall softly, creating a steady rhythm that filled the silence. The streetlights flickered, casting faint pools of light that left most of the sidewalk in darkness. Emily's grip tightened around the object she had brought with her, something small but enough to carry out what she had planned. When Claire paused to find her keys near her front door, Emily made her move. The attack was sudden, swift, and brutal. Claire never had a chance to defend herself or call for help. Within moments, Emily disappeared into the night, leaving Claire lifeless on the ground. There were no witnesses, no cameras in the immediate area, and no obvious reason anyone would target Claire. Emily believed she had executed the perfect crime. The next morning, the news of Claire's death spread quickly throughout the town. It shocked everyone, especially Daniel, who was devastated. Friends, neighbors, and co-workers mourned Claire's loss. The community struggled to understand why such a kind, quiet woman had been taken so violently. The police launched an immediate investigation but found little to work with. Claire had no known enemies, no suspicious activity in her life, and no signs that anyone had been following her. The case quickly became a mystery. Emily watched the unfolding events from a distance, convinced that she had succeeded. She believed that now, Daniel would slowly move on and eventually see her, the person who had always been quietly there for him. She thought her chance would finally come, that she had removed the obstacle standing in her way. But what Emily hadn't expected was Daniel's complete withdrawal from the world. Grief consumed him. He stopped going to his favorite cafe, stopped jogging in the mornings, and rarely left his home. Emily's plans for their perfect connection fell apart as Daniel sank deeper into sorrow. Still, Emily did not give up hope. She continued to watch him, convinced that in time, things would change. She told herself that grief was temporary, that he would eventually open his eyes to the life waiting for him. She thought she had done everything right, that her careful planning had worked, and that no one would ever know the truth. But the police quietly kept the case open. Even though there were no immediate leads, they refused to let it go. They began reviewing Claire's digital life, searching for any small clue that could explain what had happened. Slowly, piece by piece, small details began to surface, details that Emily never expected anyone to notice. And without realizing it, Emily's perfect crime was starting to crack. The walls she had carefully built around her secret were beginning to crumble. And the path she thought would lead her to happiness was leading her somewhere else entirely. Months passed, and the shock of Claire's death lingered over the quiet town like a heavy cloud. The investigation had slowed, but it never truly stopped. Detectives continued to sift through every part of Claire's life, determined to uncover something that would explain why such a senseless act had happened. They combed through her phone records, social media accounts, and personal messages. At first, everything seemed ordinary. But then they found something strange: anonymous messages that Claire had received in the months leading up to her death. The messages were cruel, filled with unsettling words from unknown profiles. They had been dismissed by Claire at the time, but now they seemed important. The police began to trace the origins of these accounts. They discovered that each fake profile had been carefully created using false information, but the digital trail, though faint, still existed. It led them to a particular internet connection registered to an apartment just a few blocks from where Claire used to live. The person who lived there was Emily Carter. On the surface, Emily appeared to be just another quiet neighbor. She had no criminal record, no known connection to Claire, and no history of violence. But her location, her routines, and the fact that she was quietly tied to those fake profiles raised immediate suspicion. Investigators took a closer look at Emily's life. They reviewed public surveillance footage from the night of the crime. At first, there wasn't much, but then they found a few grainy clips from nearby shops that showed a figure wearing a dark jacket, gloves, and a cap. The person's face was obscured, but the build, the height, and the route taken closely matched Emily. The pieces of the puzzle, once scattered and unclear, began to fit together. Police quietly gathered more evidence. They obtained search warrants for Emily's phone, her computer, and her apartment. What they found confirmed their growing suspicions. Emily's computer revealed her deep fixation on Daniel. Dozens of saved photos, detailed notes about his daily habits, and searches related to tracking and hiding one's identity online painted a disturbing picture. There were also clear links connecting Emily's device to the anonymous accounts used to harass Claire. Inside her apartment, investigators found a collection of personal journals. Each one was filled with Emily's thoughts about Daniel, her fantasies about their life together, and carefully written plans that described how she believed Claire needed to be removed to clear the path for true happiness. The handwriting, the level of detail, and the dates all aligned perfectly with the timeline of events leading to the crime. Emily had been so careful in her planning, but she had overlooked the digital footprints and the persistent efforts of the investigators who never let the case grow cold. Every message, every step, every careless mistake began to surface. The police had built a solid case against her, one that no amount of denial could erase. Emily remained unaware that the investigation was closing in on her. She continued her routine, still watching Daniel from a distance, still believing that one day he would finally see her. But behind the scenes, the final pieces were being put into place. The detectives knew that it was time to confront the person who had built her entire life around an obsession that spiraled out of control. What Emily had believed to be the perfect solution was now the very thing that would bring her downfall. The silence she had counted on was breaking, the cracks widening, and the truth, long buried, was finally rising to the surface. Emily's carefully constructed world was about to collapse, and the horrible act she thought she had hidden so well was no longer a secret. The morning Emily Carter had never prepared for finally arrived. Police officers knocked on her door with a search warrant in hand. Emily opened the door calmly, unaware of how much the investigators already knew. Her carefully guarded life, once protected by secrecy and false identities, was now completely exposed. The officers searched her apartment thoroughly, collecting journals, electronic devices, and clothing that matched the suspect's description from the surveillance footage. Emily's sense of control, which had carried her through months of silent obsession, began to slip away. At the police station, The weight of the evidence left no room for escape. Digital records linked her directly to the fake profiles that had harassed Claire. Her browser history showed searches about avoiding detection and erasing online activity. The surveillance clips placed her near the crime scene at the critical time, but the most damning evidence came from her own words, carefully written in her journals. Each entry was a window into her mind, describing in detail her obsession with Daniel and her deep resentment toward Claire. The pages revealed a slow transformation from quiet admiration to a desperate, dangerous fixation. Emily's fantasy had completely unraveled. The life she imagined with Daniel was nothing more than a dream built on tragedy and illusion. Daniel, heartbroken and consumed by grief, never noticed Emily the way she had hoped. He was trapped in his own sorrow, never seeking comfort from strangers, never opening the door Emily had spent so long waiting to walk through. The happiness she thought would be waiting for her never appeared. Her plan had only led to isolation, suspicion, and eventually, arrest. As the investigation became public, the community reacted with disbelief. Emily had been part of the same streets, the same stores, the same neighborhood. No one had suspected that she could be capable of such a calculated and cold act. People who knew her from the bookstore remembered her as quiet, polite, and distant, never giving any reason to think she was dangerous. But behind that calm surface, Emily had lived in a world of silent obsession that had pushed her to destroy another person's life. The court case moved quickly. The evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution carefully laid out Emily's digital trail, the connections to the anonymous threats, the matching clothing, and her own written confessions. There was no room for doubt. Emily eventually admitted to what she had done, though. Her explanation remained locked in her twisted belief that it had all been for love. She never fully understood how deeply wrong her actions were. She never saw Claire as a person with her own life, her own dreams, and her own future. To Emily, Claire had always been an obstacle, nothing more. The final verdict brought some closure to Daniel and the people who had loved Claire. But the wound left behind could never fully heal. Daniel would carry the weight of loss, confusion, and the painful truth that someone he had never even met had destroyed his life. Emily's sentence marked the end of the case, but the impact of her choices lingered in the quiet streets where it had all begun. Emily's story became a reminder of how obsession can twist reality, how unchecked fixation can lead to irreversible harm. She had built her life around a man who never knew her, constructed a fantasy that blinded her to the humanity of others, and committed an unthinkable act in the name of a love that had only ever existed in her own mind. In the end, Emily lost everything in pursuit of something that was never hers to begin with. The case was solved, the story was over, but the tragedy remained.